Hey guys, tonight we are venturing back in time far, far away to the vast windswept plains of the Mongol Empire. Imagine, if you can, waking up before the sun has even thought about peeking over the horizon. Not in your cozy bed, but on a felt mat spread directly on the frozen earth inside a round, smoky yurt. You can hear the wind whistling outside, a low, constant hum, and the quiet shuffling and snuffling of animals just beyond the thin walls. It's absolutely freezing. Like the kind of cold that instantly wakes up your nose hairs. This isn't going to be like rolling over and hitting snooze on your phone, trust me. You probably won't survive 5 minutes without some serious gear and a completely different attitude to discomfort. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening live, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always cool to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir as the first hint of grey light bleeds into the smoke hole at the top of the yurt. The air is sharp, biting, even indoors, carrying the distinct scent of wood smoke, dried dung fuel, livestock, and, well, you pull the heavy sheepskin robe tighter around your shoulders, feeling the stiff wool and the even stiffer leather against your cheek. It's the kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones while you're asleep, and the only way to shake it off is to actually get up. Outside, the world is slowly revealing itself from the deep blue-black of night. Miles upon miles of flat or gently rolling grassland, stretching out in every direction until it meets the impossibly huge sky. No trees to block the view, maybe a few scrubby bushes huddled low to the ground, just endless empty space under a dome of stars that are just starting to fade. The wind is a constant companion here, always blowing, always whispering secrets you can't quite understand. As a Mongol herdsman or herdswoman of this era, maybe somewhere around the 13th century, when the empire was flexing its considerable muscles, this dawn is your alarm clock. Your life, everything you own, revolves around the animals. The sheep, the goats, the horses, the cattle, the yaks, even the camels, depending on exactly where on the vast steppe you are. They are your wealth, your transport, your clothing, your shelter, and most importantly for the topic tonight, your food. Their needs dictate your day, and their health is your survival. Waking up isn't a leisurely affair, it's a practical necessity driven by the demands of the herd. You can hear them outside now, their low bleating, the snorts of horses, the occasional clang of a bell. They've been out there all night enduring the cold and they need attention. You can't exactly tell them to hold on while you brew a perfect pour-over. You push yourself up from the mat, the stiff felt protesting slightly. Your muscles are sore from a day spent riding, herding, and tending to the countless tasks of nomadic life. Every joint aches in the cold air. Looking around the yurt in the dim light, you see your family stirring too. A few lumps under blankets, maybe a child already rubbing sleepy eyes. The central hearth, where the fire died down hours ago, is just a pile of cold ashes. The smell of last night's smoke still hangs heavy, but it's a comforting smell, the smell of warmth and home in this otherwise brutally exposed landscape. This simple structure, the yurt, is a masterpiece of practical engineering. It's warm in the winter, relatively speaking, cool in the summer, and crucially, it can be packed up and moved in a few hours. You might not think much about its design, but it's the only thing standing between you and the relentless elements. One mainstream historical fact about Mongol life is the absolute centrality of the horse. Mongols spent an incredible amount of time on horseback. They could eat, sleep, and even fight from the saddle. Horses weren't just transport, they were partners in herding, crucial in warfare, and provided milk for nourishment. You practically lived on your horse. Getting off felt weird. Like walking on the moon, perhaps, if the moon was covered in frozen grass and smelled faintly of sheep. A quirky or perhaps slightly fringed tidbit about waking up on the steppe. Well, some accounts suggest that the first sound many Mongols heard in the morning wasn't a rooster or an alarm, but the sound of someone clearing their throat or spitting outside the yurt entrance. It was considered bad luck to step outside before performing this small cleansing act, a way to greet the new day and perhaps ward off any lingering bad spirits from the night. So before you even thought about stumbling out to check on the herd, there was a very specific sound you might listen for, a sign that the day was properly beginning for others in the encampment. It's not exactly a symphony, but it had its own rhythm. Now, here's where things get a little murky. and historians still argue whether there was a strictly defined universal morning routine across all Mongol tribes and all periods. Was there a specific time everyone woke up? Did everyone perform the same ritual upon rising? Or did it vary greatly depending on the wealth of the family, the season, or even just personal habit? Given the vastness of the empire and the diversity of peoples under Mongol rule, it's likely there was significant variation, but the core necessities of tending animals and preparing for the day surely impose some common structure. You pull on your dial, the traditional Mongol coat likely made of sheepskin or felt layered for warmth. It's bulky, practical clothing designed to withstand the wind and cold. It's not exactly high fashion, but it keeps you alive. You tie the sash snugly around your waist. Your breath mists in the cold air inside the yurt. You might grab a felt hat, perhaps lined with fur, to cover your head and ears. Stepping outside requires proper protection. Frostbite is a real and present danger. It's not like you can just pop into a heated car. The moment you push aside the felt flap covering the yurt entrance, the wind hits you, sharp and unforgiving. You squint as the first rays of sunlight just begin to touch the distant horizon, painting the sky in incredible shades of orange, pink and purple. It's a stunning sight, a beauty born of the harsh, empty landscape. But you don't have much time to admire it. The real work is waiting. The animals are huddled together, steaming in the cold air. They need to be checked, maybe moved to fresh pasture if the snow isn't too deep, or if you haven't moved camp recently. You might need to separate animals for milking or check for any that might have strayed during the night. This immediate engagement with the herd is the absolute first priority of the day. And the second priority? Food, or rather, the energy required to do all that work in the biting cold. Your stomach is already rumbling slightly, a hollow echo in the vast silence of the steppe. The calories burned just keeping warm are immense. This isn't a leisurely Sunday morning where you might contemplate waffles versus pancakes. This is about survival, about fueling your body for a demanding physical day in an extreme environment. Your breakfast, whenever and however you eat it, needs to provide substantial energy, warmth, and hydration. It needs to be practical based on what's available and quick to prepare in a mobile lifestyle. The thought of a steaming bowl of, well, whatever it is you're going to eat, is a powerful motivator to brave the cold and start the day. The smells from inside the yurt, maybe someone is already starting a small fire for cooking, begin to mingle with the fresh cold air outside. It's a complex mix, earthy and animalistic. And it's the promise of that first bit of warmth and sustenance that really gets you moving. The felt flap falls shut behind you, cutting off the worst of the wind, but the chill seeps through your deal almost instantly. Your boots crunch on the frozen ground, or perhaps it's packed snow depending on the season and location. You can feel the cold radiating up through the soles. The animals are stirring, a low murmur of sound that's been a constant backdrop to your life since you were born. They are huddled together for warmth, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Smoke begins to curl from the tops of other yurts in the encampment, thin ribbons against the brightening sky, a sign that others are waking and tending their own hearths. Your immediate task is the herd. You walk among them, eyes scanning quickly. Are they all accounted for? Any signs of illness or injury? Any strays that might have wandered off in the dim light? You might need to move them, coaxing them with calls and gentle nudges to a different patch of pasture, or perhaps towards a watering hole if one isn't frozen solid. The horses are the most active, prancing a little, eager to be let out to graze, or perhaps anticipating a ride. The sheep and goats are more placid, huddling together for warmth. Cattle and yaks stand like shaggy, breathing rocks, enduring the cold with stoic indifference. This isn't just a quick look-see. Depending on the size of your family's herd, this could take a significant chunk of time, all while your fingers and toes are starting to feel the bite of the cold. You might be using a herding stick, its familiar weight in your hand, guiding the animals with shouts and whistles. The sheer physical effort required in this environment is immense. Think about trying to walk through the thick snow or ride a semi-wild horse while wearing multiple layers of heavy clothing all before you've had anything to eat or drink. It's a workout before the sun is even fully up, and all this activity quickly makes you acutely aware of your own internal state. The cold demands energy. The physical work burns calories you haven't replenished since last night. Your throat feels dry from the crisp cold air you're breathing. The rumble in your stomach is becoming more insistent. While the needs of the herd are paramount, the need to refuel yourself and your family is a close second. You can't tend to animals if you're weak and shivering. So even as you're checking on a lamb or guiding a reluctant yak, your mind is probably turning towards the yurt and the promise of warmth and sustenance. Heading back to the yurt, perhaps after an hour or more out in the open, you feel the immediate blessed relief of stepping inside, even if it's still cool. Someone has likely managed to get a small fire going on the hearth, coaxing embers back to life or starting fresh with dried dung and kindling. The smell of the smoke is now comforting, a sign of returning warmth. The heat rises slowly, pushing back the pervasive chill. This is where the process of preparing the first meal of the day begins, but it's not just about cooking, it's about using the resources you have available, resources that are dictated entirely by your nomadic, animal-centric lifestyle. The vast majority of a Mongol herdsman's diet came directly from their animals. Meat, yes, but perhaps even more importantly, dairy. Milk from mares, yaks, cows, sheep, and goats provided a huge source of calories, protein, and essential nutrients. It could be consumed fresh, fermented into various forms, or processed into cheese and butter. Vegetables and grains were scarce, difficult to cultivate in the harsh climate, and even harder to transport. So, your larder, such as it was, consisted mainly of animal products. This meant your breakfast options were probably quite different from what you might be used to today, even compared to other historical diets. A mainstream historical fact about the Mongol diet is the absolute reliance on fermented mare's milk, known as airag or kumis. This wasn't just a drink, it was a staple food. The fermentation process increased its shelf life and made the nutrients more accessible. It had a slightly alcoholic content, which some sources suggest could be quite low, or, if left to ferment longer, could reach a few percent ABV. It was consumed in large quantities throughout the day, not just at specific mealtimes. A quirky or slightly fringed tidbit is related to this, airag. Some historical accounts mention that Mongol hosts would offer airag to guests, and it was considered extremely rude, almost an insult to refuse it. You were expected to accept the bowl even if you only took a small sip. This wasn't just hospitality, it was a social ritual tied to the most important food source. Imagine if someone showed up at your house and you had to drink their weird fermented milk, no matter how you felt about it, or risk causing a diplomatic incident. It puts a new spin on brunch etiquette. Now here's where historians still argue whether the airage was always the very first thing consumed in the morning. Was a bowl of fermented milk the immediate go-to upon waking, or was it something consumed later, after chores were done and the fire was established? Did they eat something else entirely before drinking airag? Or was it a constant presence, available throughout the day, so the concept of a distinct breakfast in the modern sense might be less relevant? Given that airag could be stored and didn't necessarily require heating, it's plausible it was the most readily available sustenance, but did everyone drink it the moment they opened their eyes? The sources aren't always precise about the timing of consumption within the daily rhythm. Returning to the yurt, the warmth from the fledgling fire is starting to spread. The air inside is thick with the smell of smoke, felt, and animals. You might see someone already working near the hearth, perhaps stirring a pot or preparing ingredients. Given the cold outside and the demanding work ahead, the first order of business after checking the herd would likely be something warm and calorie-rich. This is where the specifics of breakfast start to take shape, moving beyond just waking up and doing chores, and into the actual act of fueling the body for the day ahead. It's not just about hunger, it's about survival in an unforgiving world. The smoke from the hearth is growing stronger now, a comforting haze that catches the low light filtering through the smoke hole at the top of the yurt. The air inside warms incrementally, chasing away the biting edge of the morning chill. As you move closer to the central fire pit, you see the familiar tools of the dairy trade. Clay pots and wooden bowls are scattered around, some holding remnants of previous meals, others cleaned and ready for use. A large pot might be sitting near the fire, perhaps warming gently or maybe being stirred by another family member. In this world, your breakfast isn't coming from a box or a fridge. It's coming, quite literally, from the animals you just checked on. The diversity of the herd meant a diversity of milk. Mare's milk, of course, essential for airag, but also milk from cows, yaks, especially crucial in higher, colder regions, from sheep and goats. Each type had its own properties. Mare's milk is naturally higher in sugar, making it ideal for fermentation, while yak or cow milk is richer in fat, better suited for butter and cheese. This variety was your supermarket dairy aisle, only with much more walking involved. The most ubiquitous form of sustenance, available likely from the moment you opened your eyes if you chose to take it, was airag. The fermented mare's milk we mentioned. It wasn't just a drink. It was considered a food source packed with nutrients and calories. Imagine starting your day with a tangy, slightly fizzy, faintly alcoholic. Don't worry, the traditional stuff wasn't going to get you tipsy before noon usually. Dairy beverage. It's the original breakfast smoothie, just different. A big bowl of air egg could sit near the hearth, its distinctive smell a constant presence. But while air egg provided liquid fuel, you needed something more solid to get through a day of herding, riding, and dealing with the elements. This is where the other forms of dairy became crucial. Yogurt, simple fermented milk, was easy to make and provided a good source of protein and probiotics, long before anyone knew what probiotics were. You'd likely have bowls of fresh yogurt or slightly older, tangier versions available. Then there were the cheeses and curds. These weren't the fancy aged cheddars or soft brie you might find today. Mongol cheeses were typically fresh or dried. The process often involved heating milk, adding a coagulant, sometimes a piece of stomach from a young animal, charming, and separating the curds from the whey. The whey itself wasn't wasted. It could be drunk or further processed. But the curds were the real prize. The most iconic solid dairy product, and likely a significant part of a Mongol herdsman's breakfast, or any meal really, was arul. These were dried milk curds, perhaps one of the most ingenious portable, non-perishable foods ever invented. To make arul, the curds were often pressed to remove excess moisture, then shaped into various forms, sometimes small discs, sometimes larger blocks, sometimes abstract shapes that looked like edible rocks. These were then left to dry in the sun and wind, becoming incredibly hard and dense. Think of arul as the ancient world's energy bar, but way, way harder. Eating it required effort. You didn't just bite into it. You might scrape it with your teeth or suck on it, letting it slowly soften before you could chew off small pieces. It was tangy, often quite sour, and incredibly calorie-dense. A handful of arul could provide sustained energy for hours while you were out on the steppe, far from the yurt. For breakfast, you might simply grab a few pieces from a communal bag or bowl, popping them into your mouth as you head back out to the animals. A mainstream historical fact about the Mongol diet is that these dried milk curds, arul, were a staple for both daily life and military campaigns. They were lightweight, lasted for extended periods without spoiling in the right conditions, and packed a significant nutritional punch. This made them perfect provisions for warriors or herders who spent long stretches away from the main camp. They were, in essence, the original field rations. A quirky or slightly fringed tidbit relates to the sheer hardness of arul. Some accounts suggest that young children were given softened arul, or smaller, less dried pieces, but for adults, the hard variety was standard. There are even stories, perhaps slightly exaggerated, about the difficulty of chewing arul, implying it was a test of dental fortitude. Imagine if your breakfast cereal required jaws of steel. Honey, pass the hammer, I need to break off a bit of my O-shaped curd. Okay, maybe not quite that bad, but you get the picture. It certainly wasn't a soft, fluffy pancake situation. Now, here's where historians still argue whether arul was always eaten dry and hard, and while that was its primary stored form, some sources hint that it might have been rehydrated in hot water or broth, perhaps mixed with other ingredients, to create a softer, porridge-like dish for breakfast, especially in colder weather or for easier consumption. Was the morning routine one of sucking on a rock-hard curd, or was it sometimes a more liquid or soft preparation? The evidence is scattered, leaving room for debate on the exact morning consumption methods. So as you stand there by the fire, perhaps someone hands you a bowl of yogurt, or you reach into a leather pouch for a few pieces of arul, maybe you wash it down with a bowl of air egg. This combination of fermented dairy and hard curds provided the essential energy to face the day's challenges. It wasn't just about satisfying hunger, it was about survival, about practicality, about using the bounty of your animals in the most efficient way possible in a harsh environment. It was a breakfast forged on the steppe, designed for endurance, and utterly dependent on the rhythm of the herd. As the dairy fuels your initial moments of wakefulness, your thoughts might turn to something a little more substantial. While breakfast in many settled cultures might involve grains or fruit, out here on the steppe, the other cornerstone of life is meat. It's not just something you eat for dinner after a long day. Ways are found to incorporate it into the crucial morning fuel-up. Now, you're probably not sitting down to a full-on steak and egg situation at dawn. That kind of feast is reserved for special occasions or the evenings when the work is done. But the essence of meat is its concentrated energy and nutrients is something you crave to face the biting wind and endless horizons. The animals are not just milk producers, they are your larder on 4 legs. Sheep, goats, cattle, yaks in certain areas, and sometimes even horses, these are the sources of protein that power your life. The most likely way meat makes an appearance in your morning isn't as a solid chunk you have to chew vigorously. Save that for the Arjul workout, remember? It's often in a liquid form, broth, or what might be thought of as meat juice. Think of it as the original power drink, predating your fancy electrolyte mixes by a few centuries. Making broth is efficient. It extracts a lot of goodness without requiring a whole animal slaughtered just for breakfast. A pot might be simmering gently over the fire, kept warm throughout the night, or quickly heated in the morning. This broth would be made from boiling pieces of meat, maybe bones, extracting fat and flavour. It's warming, easily digestible, and provides quick energy. You might ladle yourself a bowl, steaming, perhaps a little greasy from the rendered fat, but deeply savoury and comforting. It's the kind of drink that feels like it's warming you from the inside out, pushing back against the cold that constantly tries to seep into your bones. This broth wasn't just plain meat water. It often contained chunks of fat, perhaps even small pieces of meat that had boiled off the bones. This fat is crucial in your diet. It provides sustained energy, especially in the cold environment. You might scoop up a spoonful of the rich, almost unctuous liquid, feeling the immediate warmth and the faint taste of whatever animal the broth came from. It's not like sipping chicken noodle soup. It's denser, richer, more fundamental. Drinking hot broth in the morning also serves a better practical purpose. It helps rehydrate you after sleeping and prepares your stomach for the rigors of the day. Imagine trying to gnaw on hard arul or tough dried meat without a warm liquid first. It would be like trying to eat concrete crackers. The broth softens things up, warms your core temperature, and gives you a quick hit of calories and fat before you even think about tackling anything requiring serious mastication. A mainstream historical fact regarding the Mongol diet and military strategy is the use of concentrated meat products. While not strictly a breakfast food, accounts mention soldiers carrying dried meat or meat paste, sometimes dissolved in water to make a quick soup or broth. This demonstrates the value placed on portable, rehydratable meat sources for sustenance, mirroring the practicality of morning broth in daily life. It's fuel on demand. A quirky or slightly fringed tidbit involves the concept of kumis, the fermented mare's milk we discussed earlier, sometimes being mixed with animal blood for special occasions or specific needs. While likely not a standard breakfast item, imagine explaining that to your barista. It highlights the Mongols' resourceful use of every part of their animals, even sometimes blending dairy and blood for nutrient density. Thankfully, your typical morning broth is probably blood-free. Let's stick to the broth. Here's where historians still argue whether meat broth was a daily breakfast staple for everyone, or if it was more common during colder months or when fresh meat was readily available. Was it an every morning ritual like your morning coffee, or was it something you had when the resources and conditions aligned? The nomadic lifestyle meant varying access to resources depending on the season and location, making it hard to say definitively if broth was universally consumed every single morning by every single herdsman. Maybe some days it was just ereg and arul, a purely dairy affair. Regardless of daily regularity, the presence of hot meat broth or a similar fatty liquid provided a vital contrast to the tang of ereg and the hardness of arul. It offered a different kind of energy, a deeper warmth. You might see family members hunched over small bowls, slurping quietly, the steam rising around their faces. It's a moment of quiet consumption before the work begins, a moment to absorb the fundamental sustenance that comes from the herd. Scooping up a final bit of fat floating on the surface, you finish your bowl. It's not glamorous, it's not varied in the way a modern breakfast buffet is varied. Where are the tiny omelettes and the questionable fruit salad? But it is efficient. It's packed with everything you need to face the day. Calories, fat, protein, warmth, and hydration. It's a taste of the steppe itself, hardy, direct, and utterly dependent on the animals that are your world. You can almost feel the energy spreading through you, preparing your muscles for the saddle, and your mind for the endless vigilance the herd requires. Okay, so you've had your erag, maybe some arul to chew on, and felt the comforting warmth of that meaty broth spreading through your core. This is the foundation, the reliable energy source provided by your animals. But is that it? Every single morning just dairy and meat products? Well, mostly yes. For the majority of the year in the vastness of the steppe, your diet is inextricably linked to your herd. But the world isn't entirely made of hooves and udders. Sometimes, just sometimes, other things make their way into the morning routine. Think of it less like a trip to the supermarket and more like finding a hidden treasure. The steppe, harsh as it can seem, isn't a complete desert. Depending on the season, the location and your luck, nature offers up a few sparse gifts. As spring melts into summer, you might keep an eye out for wild onions or garlic shoots pushing up through the soil. Their sharp, fresh flavour is a welcome change from the richness of the dairy and meat. Finding a patch is like hitting the jackpot, a burst of green in a landscape of browns and golds. You might nibble on them raw as you ride, or perhaps a few stalks are brought back to camp and chopped roughly into the simmering broth, adding a much-needed layer of flavour. It's not like adding a whole mirepoix, mind you, just a hint of something wild and pungent. Then there are the berries. Later in the summer, in certain valleys or near rocky outcrops, you might find small hardy bushes clinging to the earth. Wild currants, perhaps, or tiny intensely flavoured berries you've known by sight and taste since you were a child. Plucking them is a slow process, your fingers stained purple or red. These aren't the plump cultivated berries you see in modern markets. They're smaller, tougher, but packed with a concentrated sweetness or tartness. A handful of these, eaten fresh, is an incredible treat. Imagine that pop of sweetness after days of salty, rich or tangy foods. It's like your taste buds woke up and decided to throw a tiny party. These foraged additions are seasonal and scarce. You don't rely on them for calories in the way you rely on milk and meat. They are supplements, flavour enhancers, sources of vitamins you might otherwise lack, and perhaps most importantly, a psychological boost. Finding something wild and free to eat feels different. It connects you to the land in a way the managed herd doesn't quite. It's like finding a fiver in an old coat pocket. Small, unexpected, but definitely makes your day a little brighter. Though I doubt anyone back then was losing fivers in their deal. Moving beyond wild plants, there's the possibility of things acquired through trade. While many Mongol groups were largely self-sufficient in terms of food, they weren't entirely isolated. Trading posts, settlements on the fringes of the steppe, or interactions with caravans could bring in items not produced by the herds. The most significant of these, in terms of carbohydrates, would be grain. Wheat, millet, barley, these weren't typically grown by nomadic herders on a large scale, though some groups might have cultivated small plots during their summer camps. More often, grains would be traded for animal products, hides, wool, excess animals. Acquiring grain was valuable because it could be stored. Unlike fresh milk or meat, dried grain lasts. It's insurance against hard times, and it offers a different kind of sustenance. When grain was available, it might be eaten as a porridge, perhaps boiled with water or milk. Imagine a simple, hearty bowl of gruel. It wouldn't be the creamy, sugary oatmeal you might be picturing. More likely it would be plain, perhaps with a dollop of butter or urim, clotted cream, if you were lucky. It's stick-to-your-ribs food, providing complex carbohydrates for sustained energy. It's less exciting than tearing into dried meat or slurping rich broth, but it gets the job done, like eating plain toast for breakfast, functional, if not thrilling. Tea is another item that could arrive through trade. As the Mongol Empire expanded and trade routes flourished, tea became more accessible. Tea, especially brick tea, was a portable and valuable commodity. It wasn't just a drink, it could be a form of currency or a status symbol. Drinking tea, often brewed strong and mixed with milk, butter and salt, yes, salt, it's an acquired taste apparently, could be a morning ritual, particularly as it became more widely available. It provides warmth and hydration, and the caffeine, though perhaps not understood scientifically, certainly offers a kickstart similar to your modern coffee. Think of it as the original latte, but way saltier. Historians still argue whether grains, beyond limited foraging or necessity, were a significant part of the daily diet for the average nomadic Mongol before the height of the empire. Were they a luxury item consumed rarely, or did regular trade make them more common, at least for those near trade routes? The evidence is often indirect, making it hard to determine how widespread or frequent their consumption was as a morning meal component. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to trade items is the use of salt. Salt wasn't readily available everywhere on the steppe, so it was a valuable commodity acquired through trade. Its use in tea, as mentioned, but also for preserving meat and dairy, like making some forms of arul, was crucial. The fact that a simple mineral like salt had to be traded for highlights just how self-contained the pastoral economy was and how important those trade connections were for anything outside the animal realm. So while the core of your breakfast remains the bounty of your herd, the milk, the fermented products, the occasional broth, you might, on certain days in certain seasons or having recently traded successfully, find a handful of wild berries adding at a burst of freshness, a bowl of simple grain porridge providing a different kind of ballast, or a warm, salty cup of milk tea, warding off the chill. These additions are rare spices in the otherwise consistent flavour profile of steppe life. They break the monotony and remind you that the world extends beyond the pastures you roam. But for the most part, as the sun begins to truly climb, the morning meal is done. The taste of sour milk, chewy curd, and perhaps the faint residue of fat from broth lingers. Your stomach feels full, not in a heavy, bloated way, but with the dense energy required for the physical demands ahead. You stand, perhaps brushing crumbs of arul from your deal. The herd awaits, the day's work is calling. The brief respite for food is over. So yes, the core of your morning meal is usually from the animals, a reliable constant in a life of constant movement. But reliability doesn't mean sameness. The steppe whispers secrets of change with every shift in the wind, every lengthening or shortening of the day. Your breakfast, like everything else in your world, dances to the rhythm of the seasons. Think about it. Your modern breakfast cereal doesn't suddenly change flavour or disappear entirely depending on whether it's July or January, does it? Unless your kids ate it all, which is a whole other kind of seasonal shift, I suppose. But for a Mongol herdsman, the availability of food, especially for that crucial morning fuel-up, is dictated by the biological cycles of your herd and the unforgiving climate. Spring is the time of renewal, and it's also the time of milk. After the long, harsh winter, the animals, particularly the mares, begin producing milk in abundance as the pastures green up. This is when Erig comes into its own. The fermenting vessels are full, and the sour, fizzy mare's milk is plentiful. Your morning drink transitions from maybe a more watery broth or conserved tea to generous bowls of fresh airag. It's cool, refreshing, and provides a vital source of calories and vitamins after the leaner months. You're drinking liquid energy straight from the source. Fresh milk, boiled or raw, might also be more available, though fermented products store and travel better. As summer arrives, the milk keeps flowing. This is peak season for dairy. You're making aru in large quantities, drying curds under the hot sun to store for the future. Fresh curds and yogurts are easy to make and consume daily. If you happen to be near areas where wild plants grow, you might find those berries or onions mentioned earlier, offering a brief, sweet or pungent interlude in the dairy-centric menu. Meat might still be less common as a daily item in the morning, as you want your herds to grow and reproduce, but occasionally a young animal might be culled, or you might get lucky with some small game if you're in the right place. Then comes autumn. The air grows colder, and the animals' milk production begins to decrease as they prepare for winter. This is a critical time for food preservation. You're drying as much meat as possible, strips of mutton or beef hung in the cool, dry air. You're producing vast amounts of yerul, those hard little curds, because they last almost indefinitely. Your focus shifts from consuming fresh products to building up your winter stores. The breakfast reflects this. You might start dipping into the dried meat, softening it slightly, or chewing more. The abundance of summer milk is fading, replaced by the foresight of stored food. Winter is the lean time. The herds are huddled against the cold, milk is scarce or non-existent. Your breakfast now relies heavily on what you put away in the autumn. Dried meat is a staple. Our rule is your go-to solid. If you are able to trade for grain or tea, these become incredibly valuable. A warm, albeit simple grain porridge might be a blessing. Warm broth, perhaps made from rehydrated dried meat, or, if necessary, from an animal slaughtered for winter sustenance, a difficult choice as every animal is precious, provides warmth as saum and hydration against the biting cold. Fresh items are almost entirely gone. It's a diet of endurance, built on the preserved bounty of the warmer months. Think of it like surviving on power bars and jerky for 3 months, not exactly gourmet, but it keeps you going. A mainstream historical fact here, is that the seasonal migration patterns of the Mongol nomads were directly tied to finding the best pastures for their animals throughout the year, which in turn directly impacted the food sources available at different times. They followed the grass, and their diet followed the grass-fed animals. A quirky or fringe tidbit is how some groups might have used frozen techniques in winter, not refrigeration as you know it, but simply letting the extreme cold preserve meat or other items naturally outdoors. While not specifically a breakfast item, the ability to keep food frozen solid for months certainly impacted the availability of certain items during the coldest period. Imagine leaving your steak outside and coming back 3 months later to find it perfectly preserved, though you'd probably need a seriously sharp knife to cut it when frozen. Historians still argue whether routine large-scale animal slaughter specifically for food was primarily an autumn activity to prepare for winter, or if opportunities arose throughout the year that also provided meat for consumption, including the occasional morning meal. The evidence is complex, relying on archaeological finds and later written accounts, making it hard to pinpoint the exact frequency of fresh meat in the breakfast bowl outside of autumn preservation efforts. So while you might start your day with something derived from milk almost year-round, the form of that mental milk, the prevalence of meat, and the possibility of finding something wild or traded shifts dramatically. Spring and summer offer freshness and abundance focused on liquid and soft dairy. Autumn is for preservation, shifting towards drying and storing. Winter is for relying on those stores, a testament to the hard work of the previous seasons. Your breakfast is a calendar, telling you exactly where you are in the annual cycle of steppe life. It's a simple meal, yes, but it's deeply complex in its seasonal variation and its connection to the life cycle of the land and the animals that sustain you. So you've got your seasonal food sorted, whether it's fresh dairy in the spring or dried jerky in the winter. But eating isn't just about solid stuff, is it? Especially in a place as dry and often harsh as the steppe. Hydration is key, and the drinks you have available, particularly in the morning, are just as crucial as the bites you take. They warm you, they nourish you, and sometimes they're just about the only thing readily available. Let's talk about tea. Now, you might think of tea as a delicate leafy brew, maybe with a spot of milk and sugar. Forget that. Steppe tea is different. It's a cornerstone of the diet, a vital import from regions like China, and it's treated with immense respect. Tea bricks were a form of currency at times. That's how valuable this stuff was. Imagine using your Earl Grey as pocket money. Wouldn't that be fancy? Your morning tea isn't just a beverage. It's a warm, often calorie-rich concoction designed to get you going. The most common way to prepare it, especially in the morning chill, is by boiling the tea leaves, often pressed into those hard bricks and chipped off, with milk. Usually cow or yak milk if available, or sometimes mare's milk, but you don't stop there. You often add butter or animal fat, maybe even some roasted flour or grain if you have it. And salt. Yes, salty tea with fat. Sounds bracing, doesn't it? It's less like your soothing cup of chamomile and more like a savoury liquid meal replacement. This butter tea, or similar variations, are incredibly important. The fat provides much-needed calories and insulation against the cold, the salt helps retain fluids in the dry air, and the tea itself offers a bit of a pick-me-up. Caffeine and warmth. Think about waking up in a gyre, the wind whistling outside, the temperature well below freezing. A bowl of this hot, fatty, salty tea isn't just a drink, it's a lifesaver. It warms you from the inside out before you step out into the biting air to tend to the animals. It's prepared in a large pot, often kept warm, and it's ready to be served first thing. There's a communal aspect to it too. Sharing tea is a sign of hospitality and connection, even within your own family unit as you huddle around the fire. Then there's the drink that is arguably more iconic of the Mongol diet, air-ag. We touched on it in the seasonality section, the fermented mare's milk. This isn't just a summer refreshment. While its peak production is in the warmer months, it's consumed regularly when available. It's made by churning fresh mare's milk for a long time, allowing it to ferment with specific bacteria and yeasts. The result is a slightly alcoholic, sour, fizzy drink with a unique tang. It's low in alcohol, typically 1–3%, but it's incredibly nutritious. It contains vitamins, minerals, protein, and it's a good source of probiotics, which sounds very modern and healthy, doesn't it? Like a historical kefir. While you might drink air-ag throughout the day, including large quantities after a long ride, it can also be part of the morning routine, especially when plentiful in spring and summer. It provides energy and hydration. It's not as warming as butter tea on a cold morning, but its nutritional punch is undeniable. The process of making it is laborious, involving hours of churning, often done while riding or walking to keep the milk in motion. It's a product of constant work, much like tending the herds themselves. The availability of air-ag is a clear marker of the season, remember? In the cold months, when mares aren't lactating, Airag is a memory or something maybe preserved in some way, though fresh fermentation is out. That's when you rely more heavily on that rich, salty tea, or perhaps simple warm water or broth if you have ingredients. Your morning drink landscape shifts dramatically, mirroring the change in solid foods. A mainstream historical fact is the extensive trade network that brought tea bricks from settled agricultural regions into the heart of the steppe, highlighting the Mongols' reliance on external resources for certain staples like tea, which became deeply integrated into their daily lives and customs. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some accounts mention Mongols using a special leather bag called a kukur to churn the mare's milk for airag. They would strap this bag to their saddle and the motion of riding would do the churning for them. Talk about multitasking, getting your daily exercise and making booze at the same time. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of butter or fat in steppe tea was purely nutritional, calories, warmth, or also served a ritualistic or symbolic function in daily life and hospitality, given its ubiquity and the value placed on these ingredients. Was it just breakfast fuel or something more? So, while your breakfast plate might feature dairy curds or dried meat depending on the season, your bowl often holds a warming, fatty tea or a cool, tangy airag. These drinks aren't mere accompaniments, they are fundamental components of your morning energy, forged from necessity, tradition, and the practical realities of life on the move. They are your liquid breakfast, often providing as many calories and nutrients as the solid food, and they connect you to a long history of steppe hospitality and survival. That bowl of tea, or maybe the tangy airag, isn't just something you silently gulp down by yourself in the corner. Oh no. Eating even the first bites and sips of the day is deeply woven into the social fabric of your life. The gyr, that round felt tent that is your home, is the absolute center of this world, and within it sharing is paramount. Hospitality isn't a polite suggestion out here on the steppe, it's a fundamental law, a survival instinct. If you have something, you share it, period. Even if it's just a few dried curds and some warmed water, you offer it. A guest arriving, expected or not, and often they're not because no roads or phone calls, is a significant event. Their arrival means you immediately drop what you're doing, whether you're sorting out breakfast or tanning a hide that smells ripe, and focus on welcoming them. You invite them in, offer them the seat of honor near the back of the gyr, opposite the door, the most secure spot traditionally, and then you offer them food and drink, the best you have available. This means that those precious bowls of butter tea, or perhaps some leftover dried meat from yesterday's meal, are immediately brought out. Even if your own stomach is rumbling like a distant thunderstorm, you serve your guest first. It's not just good manners, it's literally how society functions. Refusing to offer food or refusing an offer of food are serious social blunders, potentially even insults. Imagine rocking up to your friend's place and they just pretend not to see you, or you refuse the perfectly good cup of tea they offer. Instant awkwardness, right? Now multiply that by survival depends on mutual support and you get the steppe version. The sharing extends beyond formal guests too. Within your own family unit inside the gyr, meals are usually taken together. There might be a designated area or a shared mat. Food, even the simple morning fare, is placed out, and people partake together. There's a sense of communal sustenance. You're all in this together, surviving together, eating together. The division of labour is clear, and someone prepares the food, someone serves it, but the consumption is collective. The structure of the gyr itself often dictates the social order, and this extends to eating. Men might gather in one area, women and children in another, though often within the same main space. The head of the household typically sits in the place of honour. When serving food, there might be a specific order. Elder men first, then younger men, then women, then children. This isn't about who's hungriest. It's about reinforcing social structure and respect. It's a bit like your family dinner table rules, but with higher stakes and potentially more fermented milk. This communal aspect means that even a simple breakfast of dried curds and tea becomes a moment of connection. You talk about the morning tasks ahead, the state of the herd, the weather, always the weather. It's the original morning briefing fueled by yak butter and caffeine. The warmth of the tea isn't just physical, it's the warmth of human interaction in a sometimes lonely landscape. Think about the economics of this sharing too. In a subsistence economy where resources are scarce and unpredictable, pooling and sharing are essential safety nets. Your neighbour might have had a better hunt this week, or their mares are producing more milk. You share your excess, knowing that next week you might be the one in need. This constant exchange of goods and hospitality builds strong ties that are vital when facing challenges like harsh winters, animal raids, or illness. Your breakfast bowl is also a small edible piece of your social contract. A mainstream historical fact about Mongol society is the strength of their kinship ties and the importance of hospitality codes. Ik Zasag, or Great Law, attributed to Genghis Khan, is said to have codified some of these, though its exact contents are debated, which mandated generosity towards guests and travellers, making the offering of food and drink a non-negotiable part of interaction. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the specific way meat was often presented and shared during more substantial meals, cut into pieces and passed around, often with specific parts reserved for honoured guests or elders. While breakfast was simpler, this underlying principle of ritualised sharing applied to all food presentations. You wouldn't just dump a pile of jerky on the ground and tell everyone to go for it. There was etiquette involved, even with tough, chewy, dried meat. Historians still argue whether the extreme emphasis on hospitality and sharing in nomadic cultures was primarily an adaptation for survival in a challenging environment, ensuring mutual aid and intelligence gathering, or if it stemmed from deeper, perhaps shamanistic or animistic, beliefs about the interconnectedness of all things and the spiritual significance of giving and receiving. Was it pragmatic or profound? Probably both, because humans are complicated like that. So bet as you sit there in the soft light filtering through the Jeer's smoke hole, slurping your salty fatty tea and nibbling on some dried curds, remember that you are not just eating alone. You are participating in a timeless ritual of sharing, strengthening bonds with your family, and upholding the critical codes of hospitality that have kept your people connected and surviving on these vast empty plains for centuries. Your simple morning meal is a microcosm of a complex, resilient society. The last drops of tea are drained, the empty bowls set aside, perhaps licked clean by a quick-witted dog hovering nearby, because, calorie conservation is a full-time job out here. This shared warmth of the jeer begins to dissipate as the first person ducks out through the low doorway, and then it's your turn. You push aside the felt flap, step out into the early morning chill, and immediately the scale of your world hits you. It's vast, unimaginably vast. The sky is a bruised purple and grey, maybe streaked with the first hopeful hints of pink on the eastern horizon. The steppe stretches out before you, a seemingly endless expanse of brown and gold grasses, sometimes flat as a pancake, sometimes gently rolling like a giant sleeping animal. The air is crisp, sharp, biting at your exposed skin. You pull your fur-lined deal tighter around you, and then you hear them. The sounds of the herd, the bleating of sheep, the deeper moo of cattle, the soft snorts of horses, the grumpy rumbling of yaks, if you have them. They aren't neatly gathered in one place like livestock in a pen. They're scattered across the landscape, having grazed through the night, following their instincts. Your breakfast, that simple bowl of energy, was the fuel for this. The demanding, ceaseless work of managing these animals on the move. This isn't a 9-to-5 job where you punch a clock and sit at a desk. Your office is the entire horizon. Your co-workers are several hundred slightly dim-witted, four-legged creatures, and your commute involves tracking hoofprints in the dew. The morning's first task is usually to find the main body of the herd if they've wandered far, or to begin guiding them towards fresh pasture for the day. This might mean climbing a small rise for a better view, scanning the horizon, or simply following the well-worn paths they tend to make. You might be on horseback, already saddled up while the last bits of tea were being finished. Horses are your legs out here, indispensable tools for covering ground quickly, turning stubborn animals or chasing down strays. Or you might be on foot initially, especially if the camp is moving later in the day and you need to gather the animals from a close radius. The ground underfoot might be soft from overnight dew, or frozen solid and crunchy depending on the season. Every step feels purposeful, a part of the ancient rhythm of following the grass. The variety of animals you manage is key. Mongols traditionally herded 5 main types, known as the 5 snouts: horses, cattle, including yaks, sheep, goats, and camels. Each has its own needs, its own temperament, and its own value. Horses for transport, warfare, and milk meat. Cattle and yaks for meat, milk, hides, and sometimes draft work. Sheep and goats for meat, milk, wool, and hides. Camels for transport, especially in harsher desert steppe environments, and for their wool and milk. Managing this diverse portfolio is like being the CEO of a very smelly mobile corporation, except your employees tend to just wander off if they don't like the direction. As the sun begins to properly peer over the edge of the world, casting long shadows, the steppe comes alive. You might see other family members or neighbours doing the same thing in the distance, small figures on horseback against the vast backdrop. There's a quiet communication that happens across these distances. Signals, maybe a yodel-like call, understanding who is taking which part of the herd or heading in which direction. It's a silent ballet of motion across the plains. Think about the sheer mileage involved. A herd needs vast areas to graze without depleting the vegetation. This necessitates constant seasonal movement. From summer pastures where the grass is lush and high, to winter pastures offering some shelter and maybe different forage. Herding isn't just about keeping track of the animals, it's about knowing the land, understanding the weather patterns, finding water sources, and planning the migrations. It's a constant calculation involving grass, water, temperature, and the health of the herd. You're basically a walking, talking, horse-riding ecological expert, whether you know it or not. A mainstream historical fact about Mongol herding is the sophisticated system of seasonal pasturing known as ale movement that allowed them to utilize the steppe resources sustainably over vast territories, moving camps several times a year in a cyclical pattern between different grazing grounds. This wasn't random wandering, it was a carefully managed system honed over centuries. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the practice of using specific calls or whistles that the animals were trained to respond to, acting almost like verbal sheepdogs across long distances. Each family or clan might have had its own distinct calls. Imagine trying to train several hundred sheep to listen to your specific whistle. Sounds like a fun afternoon, right? Probably more effective than yelling, though. Historians still argue whether the timing and routes of these seasonal migrations were primarily dictated by environmental factors like rainfall and pasture quality, or if social and political considerations, such as avoiding rival groups or gathering for important events, played an equally significant role in determining the movement patterns of individual herding units. Was it grass or diplomacy that set the schedule? So as the morning unfolds, you are fully immersed in the work. The dust kicked up by hooves settles on your deal, the sun warms your back, the wind whips your hair. You're directing the flow, urging the stragglers, keeping an eye out for predators, wolves are always a concern, or injured animals. The gentle lowing and bleating of the herd become the soundtrack to your day. Your breakfast energy is now being translated directly into motion, into the essential, tireless effort that defines your existence on the Mongolian steppe. This is what that tea and those curds were for, to power the heart of the nomadic life. So you're out on the steppe, the wind is whipping, the herd is slowly starting to move, guided by your careful movements. The sheer scale of the landscape is starting to feel less overwhelming and more like home, but it's not just about the movement, about finding grass and water. These animals are also your mobile larder, your dairy farm on hooves. And unlike your breakfast, which was consumed relatively quickly, the process of extracting that energy source is constant. Milking is a daily, sometimes multiple times a day task. It's not just about feeding the calves or foals, it's about harvesting liquid gold. You might think of milking a cow, but remember the Mongol herds were diverse. You'd be milking horses, cattle, yaks, sheep, goats, even camels, depending on what your family owned and where you were. Each animal type requires a slightly different approach, a different touch, a different level of patience. Milking a mare, for example, is a delicate dance. Mares are typically milked while their foals are present, sometimes even encouraged to nuzzle the mare during milking, as it helps stimulate milk flow. You approach quietly, perhaps singing a soft tune to soothe her, positioning yourself carefully beside her flank. The milk spurts warm and frothy into a leather bucket or a wooden pail. It's not a huge volume compared to a modern dairy cow, but it's incredibly rich in nutrients, and you'll be doing this multiple times throughout the day during the milking season, often from spring through autumn, as the mares produce smaller amounts more frequently. Milking the other animals follows a similar pattern, though perhaps less ritualized than with the mares. Cattle and yaks are milked while their calves are nearby. Sheep and goats, perhaps the easiest to handle in terms of individual size, still require speed and efficiency when you have hundreds to get through. Camels, the majestic, sometimes stubborn ships of the desert, can be milked kneeling beside them, reaching up to their udder. The feel of the warm milk on your hands, the rhythmic sound of the stream hitting the bucket, it's a fundamental part of your daily life, as ingrained as breathing. This constant supply of milk isn't just consumed fresh, although a gulp straight from the udder on a cold morning might be invigorating, or maybe just weird, depending on your perspective. The true magic of Mongol cuisine lies in its transformation. Milk is the raw material for an incredible array of preserved and portable foods. Think about it. No refrigeration. How do you keep this vital nutrient source from spoiling in the sun or freezing in the winter? You process it. The most famous perhaps is airag, or kumis fermented mare's milk. This isn't your gentle morning latte, this is a tangy, slightly alcoholic fizzy beverage. Making airags is a continuous process. Fresh mare's milk is added to a large leather churn, often made from horsehide, which still contains some of the previous batch. This starter culture gets things going. Then for hours, sometimes even days, the mixture is churned, agitated constantly. Traditionally, this might have been done by someone sitting beside the churn, stirring with a long stick, or by attaching the churn to the doorframe of the gier so it gets sloshed every time someone enters or exits. Imagine the dedication required. "Excuse me, just got to get through the door," giving the airag a quick stir as I go. It's a workout and a beverage production line combined. The result is a drink that is nutritious, hydrating, and yes, slightly alcoholic, usually between 1 to 3% AB, though it can get higher. It's packed with vitamins and probiotics. Airag is not just a drink. It's a staple food, a social lubricant, and deeply culturally significant. It's the taste of the steppe, the liquid heart of nomadic life. But dairy production doesn't stop there. Milk is also turned into tarag, yogurt, by curdling it with a starter culture. This yogurt can be eaten fresh or further processed. Boiled milk is skimmed for its cream, ultens, a rich, buttery topping. And then there are the many forms of dried curds and cheeses, collectively often called arul. Making arul is another ingenious way to preserve milk. Milk is typically curdled, the whey drained off, and the curds are pressed and then cut into various shapes, small squares, discs, or intricate patterns. These curds are then left to dry in the sun and wind, often on top of the gier or on racks. They shrink, harden, and become intensely flavourful, chewy little nuggets of concentrated dairy energy. Think of arul as the original power bar. It's lightweight, non-perishable, and packed with protein and calcium. You can carry a bag of these dried curds with you for weeks or months. They can be eaten hard and chewy, rehydrated in water or tea, or even ground into a powder to be added to other dishes. They vary in tanginess and texture depending on the milk source and the preparation method. Some are quite sweet, others are sour. Biting into a piece of arul is like getting a condensed blast of steppe goodness. Just be prepared for the chew factor. Some pieces can feel like trying to gnaw through a very tasty rock. Your jaw muscles probably get a decent workout just from snacking. The sheer volume of milk processed into these products is astounding. It's a continuous cycle. Milk, ferment, churn, curdle, drain, dry. The women of the household were primarily responsible for this intensive dairy processing, a task that occupied much of their time during the warmer months when milk production was highest. While the men were often out managing the herds across vast distances, the women were the masters of the mobile dairy kitchen, transforming the raw output into the storable staples that would sustain the family through leaner times or long journeys. A mainstream historical fact is that dairy products, particularly fermented mare's milk and dried curds, formed the absolute backbone of the Mongol diet for much of the year, providing essential calories, protein and vitamins in an environment where agriculture was difficult or impossible. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Mongols sometimes used hot stones dropped into milk to speed up the curdling process. A simple but effective method when fire was readily available. It's like speedrunning cheese making with geology. Historians still argue whether the nutritional reliance on dairy, particularly the consumption of arak, contributed significantly to the famed physical endurance and resilience of Mongol warriors, providing a quick source of energy and hydration during long campaigns. Was it the milk power, or just sheer willpower? So, as you spend your morning with the herd, remember that every animal represents not just potential meat, but also a walking, breathing source of daily nutrition that requires constant attention and ingenious processing. The buckets fill, the churns are topped up, and the racks of curds are slowly drying in the sun. This constant dairy production is the hidden engine of the nomadic lifestyle, turning the bounty of the steppe into the fuel that powers everything, including those simple, energy-dense breakfasts that start your day. The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. You've finished the milking, perhaps snatched another handful of dried curds, and the rhythm of the day begins in earnest. While dairy is the lifeblood during the warm months, a constant renewable resource, it's not available year-round in the same abundance. Milk production wanes significantly in autumn and ceases in winter. So what fills the gap? What do you eat when the udders run dry and the our rule stores start to dwindle? You turn to the other vital output of your herd, meat. These animals you spend your life with are not just sources of milk, wool, hides, or transport. They are also fundamentally walking pantries. Eating meat is a necessity on the steppe, especially during the harsh cold months when plants are dormant and dairy is scarce. It provides the concentrated energy and protein needed to survive sub-zero temperatures and maintain strength for the demanding physical labour of herding. Now, while Mongols were renowned herders, they weren't exclusively vegetarians who occasionally indulged in dairy. Hunting was also a skill and provided important supplements to the diet, especially wild game like gazelle, marmots, or even wolves, though wolf meat was apparently considered less desirable, perhaps a bit chewy. Learning to track, stalk, and kill prey with a bow and arrow, or by coordinating hunts on horseback, was part of growing up on the steppe. It sharpened your skills and added variety, though you wouldn't rely solely on unpredictable hunting for your main sustenance. Imagine trying to feed a family on just marmot burgers, not exactly a sustainable plan. The primary source of meat comes from the herd itself, through culling. This isn't random slaughter. It's a carefully managed process. You cull animals that are old, weak, surplus to breeding needs, or injured. This helps maintain the health and quality of the herd while providing essential food. There's a practical economy to it. You wouldn't slaughter your prime breeding stock or your fastest horses casually. The timing might coincide with times when fresh meat is most needed, like heading into winter, or perhaps before a long journey. When an animal is slaughtered, nothing is wasted. The meat, of course, is paramount. The hides provide materials for clothing, shelter, and containers like those air-ag churns. The bones can be used for tools, fuel, or even games. Tendons make strong glue or bowstrings. Intestines can be cleaned and used as casings or eaten. Blood might be consumed, perhaps cooked into a sausage or added to stews, a rich source of iron. It's a complete utilization, born out of necessity and respect for the life taken. Fresh meat isn't something you eat every day. While you might enjoy a feast of fresh mutton after a successful culling or hunt, the vast majority of meat needs to be preserved. Remember, no refrigeration here either. So just like with dairy, ingenious methods were developed to make meat last, to make it lightweight and portable for journeys or war campaigns. The most important method was drying. This dried meat is called borts. It's legendary for its nutritional density and portability. Imagine taking an entire cow or yak, drying its meat, and ending up with just a few kilograms of material that can sustain you for weeks. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it was real. Making borts was a serious undertaking, usually done in autumn, before the intense colds set in. You'd butcher the animal, carefully removing all fat and bone, and slicing the lean meat into long, thin strips, perhaps only an inch or two thick. These strips would then be hung to dry in the wind and sun, often from ropes stretched between poles, or even from the rafters of the ger. The dry, windy climate of the steppe was perfect for this. It quickly removes moisture, inhibiting bacterial growth. You'd need to protect the meat from birds or insects, perhaps with a light net or by hanging it inside a structure with good airflow. As the meat dries over several weeks, it shrinks dramatically, becoming hard and brittle. Once completely dry, it's often pounded into a coarse powder or broken into small pieces. This borts is then packed into leather bags. A small bag of borts, perhaps weighing just a few pounds, could represent the meat of an entire animal and provide sustenance for a person for a long time. Eating borts wasn't like biting into a modern jerky stick, which often has marinades and is less intensely dried. It was hard and flavorful. You might chew on a piece directly, letting it slowly soften and release its nutrients. More commonly, the pounded borts would be added to boiling water to make a thick, nourishing soup or stew. Just a spoonful of borts powder could transform plain hot water into a meal. It was the ultimate convenience food of the steppe. Just add water, and maybe some wild onion if you were lucky, and you had a high-protein meal ready. It's basically the historical equivalent of those astronaut food pouches, but way, way tougher on your teeth if you ate it dry. Your dentist would definitely recommend the soup method. Beyond drying, meat could also be preserved by freezing during the deep winter, but that was less reliable for portability. Sometimes meat was smoked or even packed in salt if available, though salt was a precious commodity, but drying, borts, was the absolute key. Think about the logistics of military campaigns. How did Mongol armies travel vast distances with incredible speed? They couldn't carry bulky supplies. They relied heavily on their herds for transport and on lightweight, energy-dense food like aborts and arul. A soldier could carry a pouch of dried meat and dried curds, requiring minimal water to prepare, and stay nourished on the march for days. It was the fuel that powered their mobility. While meat and dairy formed the pillars of the diet, other foods were scarce. Wild plants like onions, garlic, and certain roots or berries might be gathered seasonally if you knew where to look, adding a bit of flavour and precious vitamins. Trade with settled peoples could bring grains, tea, or other goods, but this wasn't a daily occurrence for most nomadic families deep in the steppe. For large parts of the year, especially winter, it was meat and preserved dairy supplemented by whatever you could forage or hunt. A mainstream historical fact is that dried meat bought was a critical food source for the Mongols, particularly renowned for its portability and nutritional value, enabling their famous long-distance military campaigns. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that when making borts, sometimes the meat would be aged slightly before drying, allowing natural enzymes to begin breaking down the muscle fibers, which might have subtly affected the final texture and flavour. Think of it as prime-aging your steppe jerky. Historians still argue whether the high-protein, high-fat diet based on meat and dairy was a key factor in the physical development and stature of the Mongol people, or if environmental factors played a more significant role. So as you move with the herd, you see not just animals, but future meals, preserved for months or even years. The process of transforming living animals into storable, transportable energy is just as vital as the daily milking. From the feast of a fresh kill to the hard, chewy power of borts, meat is the silent partner to dairy, ensuring survival and strength through the long seasons of the steppe. You've thought about the solids, the dairy and the meat, the things that fill your belly and provide enduring energy, but you can't just eat dry borts and pounded arul all day, can you? You need something to drink. And just like the food, the primary sources of hydration come directly from your animals. While you might occasionally find a spring or waterhole, clean water isn't always guaranteed, especially on the move or in arid regions. Relying solely on static water sources isn't the nomadic way, so you turn to the endless liquid supply provided by the mares, milk. But drinking fresh warm mare's milk straight from the source isn't the everyday norm for adults, though children certainly do. The most iconic, the most essential, the most deeply ingrained beverage in steppe culture is airag. It's fermented mare's milk. Sounds interesting, right? It's not like pouring yourself a glass of milk from the carton. Think of it more like a naturally carbonated, slightly sour, mildly alcoholic yogurt drink. Making airag is a constant rhythm of life activity during the summer months when the mares are lactating heavily. It's not a passive process, it requires work. The fresh mare's milk is collected throughout the day. You don't let it sit around, it needs to start the fermentation process relatively quickly. It's poured into large leather bags or wooden vats, often suspended inside the ger or near the entrance. And then comes the physical part, churning. This isn't a gentle stir. The milk is vigorously agitated, sometimes for hours at a time, repeatedly throughout the day and night. This churning is crucial. It breaks down the milk fats, incorporates air, and encourages the growth of the specific bacteria and yeasts that cause the fermentation. Think of it as the original manual labour smoothie maker, but way smellier and less likely to involve kale. Family members take turns churning. Children learn to do it early. It's a repetitive, almost hypnotic task. You might use a special paddle or a plunger-like tool to beat the milk inside the container. The constant motion prevents the milk from separating and helps the fermentation proceed evenly. Over several hours, and often by adding a bit of starter culture from a previous batch, kind of like sourdough, the milk begins to transform. It thickens slightly, develops a tangy, sour flavour, and starts to fizz gently as carbon dioxide is produced by the yeasts. The finished airag is a pale, slightly cloudy liquid. Its taste is complex, sour, tangy, a little bit yeasty, and slightly effervescent. It's definitely an acquired taste for outsiders, but for the Mongols it's nourishing, refreshing, and provides a mild, pleasant buzz. The alcohol content is relatively low, typically ranging from 0.5% to 2.5%, depending on the fermentation time and temperature. You can drink a lot of airag throughout the day without getting completely plastered, though a few bowls might definitely make the afternoon nap more appealing. Aero isn't just a drink, it's a cultural cornerstone. It's offered to guests as a sign of hospitality. Large amounts are consumed during festivals and gatherings. It's seen as healthy and invigorating. Nutritionally, it's a powerhouse. It still contains many of the nutrients of fresh milk, protein, vitamins, minerals, but the fermentation makes them more digestible and adds beneficial probiotics. Plus, the mild alcohol content can have a slightly stimulating effect, which could be useful during long days of herding. It's the original energy drink, just without the suspicious levels of caffeine and the neon colours. While airag from mares is the most prized, other milk could also be fermented, though the result wasn't considered true. Airag. Cow, yak, or even camel milk could be used, but they tend to produce a thicker, more yogurt-like product called tarag, or other local names, rather than the thin, effervescent airag of mares. Mares' milk has a higher sugar content and different protein structure that makes it uniquely suited for this type of fermentation. Water was, of course, drunk when available and clean, but relying on airag meant you carried your hydration source with you in the form of your mares. You could also boil milk from cows, yaks, or camels, as boiling mare's milk can be tricky, to make it safer to drink and potentially preserve it slightly longer, though boiling would destroy the cultures needed for airag. Sometimes, if you were near settlements or trade routes, you might get your hands on tea, which became increasingly popular, often brewed with milk and butter. But for the traditional herdsman on the move, especially in the summer, airag was king. A mainstream historical fact about the Mongol diet is the central importance of airag, fermented mare's milk, not just as a drink, but as a staple food source, providing hydration, nutrition, and even a mild stimulant effect crucial for their nomadic lifestyle. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that traditionally, before offering airag to a guest or consuming it yourself, it was customary to dip a finger into the drink and lightly flick a few drops towards the sky in cardinal directions as an offering to the spirits and the land. It's kind of like a spiritual tasting menu before you get to the main course. Historians still argue whether the widespread consumption of airag and other fermented dairy products significantly impacted the gut microbiome of the Mongol people, potentially contributing to their resilience and health in their specific environment. So, as the sun warms the steppe and the mares graze, the rhythmic sound of churning airag echoes from within the ger. It's a constant reminder of life's flow, the transformation of milk into this essential beverage. You dip a ladle into the cool, tangy liquid, feel the slight tingle on your tongue, and know that this drink, born of hard work and natural processes, fuels you just as surely as the meat and dried curds. It's the liquid heart of the nomadic diet. So you have your airag, the essential liquid lifeblood of the summer months, keeping you hydrated and providing a gentle lift. But the mares don't lactate all year, and you can't carry vats of fermented milk with you constantly. You need dairy in a more solid, more storable form. This is where the ingenuity of steppe people truly shines, turning perishable milk into staples that can last through the harsh winters and long journeys. Beyond the bubbly tang of airag, the next step in milk processing often involves making tarag, which is essentially yogurt. This is usually made from milk that isn't destined for airag, or perhaps from cow, yak, or camel milk, which, as we mentioned, isn't ideal for proper airag. Making tarag is simpler than airag. You don't need the vigorous, constant churning. You just need to heat the milk, let it cool to a specific temperature, a skill learned through generations, no thermometers needed, and add a bit of starter culture from a previous batch. Then you wrap it up warmly, maybe nestle it by the fire, or in a cozy corner of the ger, and let the bacteria do their work overnight. By morning you have tarag, thick, creamy, and wonderfully sour. It's still a fresh product, best consumed within a few days, and it's delicious on its own. Maybe mixed with a bit of sugar or grain if you have it, or used as a base for other dishes. It's cooling in the summer heat and provides excellent nutrients and probiotics, keeping your gut happier than a yak in a lush pasture. But tarag, like fresh milk and airag, is perishable. Its true destiny for long-term storage is to become arul. Remember that reference to arul way back when we talked about breakfast? Well, this is where it comes from. Arul means dried curds or dried dairy product, and it's the ultimate portable, shelf-stable, high-energy snack of the steppe. The process of making arul starts with tarag. The thick yogurt is often heated gently again, which helps separate the curds from the whey. The whey, the yellowish liquid, is drained off. Don't worry, the whey isn't wasted. It's full of nutrients and can be drunk, given to animals, or used in other ways. What you're left with is a thick white mass of curds. This curd mass is then pressed to remove as much liquid as possible. Sometimes it's put into cloth bags and weighted down. Once it's relatively dry and firm, it's time for shaping. This is where you get the incredible variety of arul you might see today. Little balls, flat discs, chunky squares, intricate patterns. These shapes aren't just for fun, though some look pretty cool. They're designed to maximize surface area for drying and make them easy to handle and store. You might break off pieces, roll them into shapes between your palms, or cut them into blocks. Then comes the most critical step: drying. The shaped curds are spread out on mats or boards, often placed on top of the gyre, where they get maximum exposure to the sun and wind. The dry, sunny, windy climate of the steppe is perfect for this. You have to watch them, though, turning them occasionally to ensure even drying and protecting them from rain or ambitious birds who might fancy a cheesy snack. Over several days, sometimes even weeks depending on the size and weather, the curds dry out completely, becoming rock-hard little nuggets. The finished arul is incredibly durable. It's basically a dairy brick. It can last for months, even years, if kept dry. Imagine that, cheese that never goes bad, assuming you don't drop it and chip a tooth trying to eat it. Chewing arul is an experience. Some varieties are just tangy and hard, requiring serious jaw work. Think of it as nature's jawbreaker, but with protein. Others might be slightly softer or sweeter depending on the milk used in the process. Why go to all this trouble? Because arul is a concentrated source of protein, calcium and energy that doesn't require refrigeration. You can stuff bags of it onto your camel or horse and have sustenance for weeks or months of travel or herding far from your base camp. It's the perfect portable fuel source, a bit like an ancient protein bar, just way less processed and potentially more likely to break dental work. You can chew on it dry, or you can rehydrate it by soaking it in water or tea, turning it back into a soft, crumbly curd that can be eaten plain or added to soups and stews. This rehydrated version is much easier on the teeth. Besides tarag and arul, other milk derivatives were also important. Urum, a thick layer of clotted cream skimmed from boiled milk, was highly prized. It's rich, decadent, and often eaten fresh or mixed with other things. Butter was also made, but not always in the solid blocks we think of. It was often clarified into a type of ghee, which lasted longer without refrigeration. This butter or ghee was sometimes used in cooking or added to tea, giving it a rich, creamy texture that helped provide energy and warmth in the cold climate. A mainstream historical fact is that the practice of drying dairy products like arul was a fundamental food preservation technique for the Mongol nomads, allowing them to store and transport milk-based nutrition over vast distances and long periods, crucial for their mobile lifestyle. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that children on the steppe often use particularly hard pieces of arul as toys, or even makeshift tools, before eventually softening them for eating, highlighting just how durable these dried curds were. Imagine playing catch with your lunch. Historians still argue whether the intense processing and drying of dairy while preserving nutrients significantly reduced the bioavailability of certain vitamins compared to fresh milk products. All these dairy products, the fresh milk, the fermented arag, the tangy tarag, the rock-hard arul, the rich urum, showcase the incredible resourcefulness of the Mongol herdsmen. They took the primary product of their animals, milk, and transformed it in countless ways, ensuring they had food and drink for every season, every journey, and every need. It's a whole dairy universe far beyond what you see in your supermarket aisle. And as the sun bakes the curds on the gyre roof, you know that this painstaking process is what keeps you fed and strong through the changing year. While the daily rhythm is dictated by the herds and the need for consistent nourishment from milk and dried provisions, those reliable, if sometimes jaw-breaking, arul bricks we just talked about, there are times when the steppe comes alive with celebration. These aren't just random parties, they're anchor points in the year marking important transitions, successful endeavours, or strengthening social bonds. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of your office holiday party, but instead of lukewarm punch and awkward small talk, you get serious meat and potent drinks under a vast sky. And the food? Well, this is where the diet gets truly special. Daily meals are about efficiency and sustenance. Feast meals are about abundance, community, and showcasing hospitality. When a wedding happens, or a major festival like Nadam is underway, or perhaps an important guest arrives, or a successful hunt brings down significant game, the simple preparations of boiling or drying just won't cut it. You pull out the stops, which usually means preparing a substantial amount of meat in a more elaborate, time-consuming way. The star of most Mongol feasts, the centerpiece that makes everyone's eyes light up and potentially their cholesterol levels rise, is often an entire animal, or a large portion of one, cooked using ingenious methods that turn tough steppe meat into tender, flavorful dishes. And the most famous of these, the one you might have heard whispers about, is korkog. Imagine a large piece of meat, usually mutton, though sometimes goat or even marmot if you're lucky enough to catch one, that is cooked inside a sealed container with superheated stones. Yes, stones. It sounds prehistoric because in a way it is, but it's incredibly effective and results in some of the most succulent meat you'll ever taste. To make korkog, you first need a suitable container. In the past, this might have been a specially prepared animal stomach or a large metal pot or milk churn if available through trade. Nowadays, people often use a large metal can with a tight lid, like a milk can or even a repurposed industrial container. It needs to be sturdy enough to hold a significant amount of heat and pressure. Next, you need your meat. It's usually cut into chunks, bones and all, as the bones add flavour and nutrients. You might rub it with salt and maybe some wild herbs if you can find them, perhaps wild onion or garlic or thyme depending on the season and location. Sometimes a few vegetables are added if available, like carrots or potatoes. These would be later additions through trade and influence. Obviously not original to Genghis Khan's time, but hey, the method is ancient. Now for the stones. These are the magic ingredient. You need smooth round stones, usually river stones, about the size of your fist or slightly smaller. They need to be sturdy and not prone to cracking when heated. These stones are heated in a roaring fire until they are scorching hot, glowing faintly red. This is the critical step and requires careful handling. Picking up glowing rocks isn't exactly a low-risk activity. You definitely don't want to accidentally drop one on your foot. That would ruin the festive mood and your foot. Once the stones are hot, they are carefully layered in the container with the meat and vegetables. You start by placing some hot stones at the bottom, then add some meat, then more stones, layering meat and stones until the container is full. The radiant heat from the stones immediately starts cooking the meat from the inside out. A little water or broth might be added to create steam and prevent things from drying out completely. The container is then sealed tightly. This is key. By sealing it, you create a pressure cooker effect. The heat from the stones combined with the steam generated cooks the meat relatively quickly and keeps it incredibly moist and tender. The container is often placed near the fire, but the primary cooking is happening internally. As it cooks, the container gets hot, sometimes even bulging slightly from the pressure. After an hour or two, maybe a bit longer, depending on the size of the container and the amount of meat, the korkog is ready. The lid is carefully opened, and steam billows out, carrying the rich aroma of cooked meat. The hot stones are usually removed first and often passed around for people to hold in their hands. They are said to have therapeutic properties, warming you from the inside out, which is particularly nice on a chilly steppe evening. Plus, it's a conversation starter. Wow, your rocks are really hot. Thanks, I cooked dinner with them. The meat is then served directly from the container, incredibly tender, falling off the bone. It's a communal dish, often eaten by hand. The flavour is pure, intense meat, subtly enhanced by any herbs or vegetables added. It's a feast for the senses, the smell, the sight of the steaming meat, the feel of the warm stones, and of course the taste. It's the kind of meal where you know you're celebrating something significant. Another traditional feast preparation, though perhaps less common than korkog depending on the region and available equipment, is budog. This is even more intense. Budog involves cooking an entire animal, often a goat or marmot, inside its own skin, also using hot stones. You essentially bone the animal through a small opening, fill the cavity with meat chunks and hot stones, seal it up, and then cook it over a fire, often rotating it. It's messy, it's smoky, and it's definitely not for the faint of heart or weak of stomach, but the result is incredibly flavourful meat infused with a smoky essence. It's a primal cooking method, connecting you directly to the animal and the land. Imagine explaining that to your vegan neighbour. Oh, you grilled? That's nice. I cooked a goat inside itself with rocks. Besides these spectacular meat dishes, feasts might include other treats not part of the daily grind. Sometimes this means specially prepared offal, perhaps boiled and seasoned, or blood sausages. Richer dairy products like extra creamy urim might be served in larger quantities. If trade has been good, you might see some limited sweets, possibly made with wild berries preserved in fat or honey if available, though refined sugar was certainly not a staple. Stronger drinks might also appear. While arag is a daily drink for feasts, a more potent version might be served, or even arki, a distilled spirit made from fermented milk, essentially milk vodka, which is definitely not for casual sipping. This milky firewater is potent and served in small quantities, a true marker of a special occasion. The act of feasting itself is deeply ingrained in Mongol culture and history. It's not just about filling your belly, it's about cementing relationships, demonstrating generosity, sharing success, and honouring guests or ancestors. A well-prepared feast reflects well on the host and strengthens the bonds within the community or between allied families. You're not just eating, you're participating in a ritual that has bound steppe peoples together for millennia. Think of the hospitality rules. You always offer food and drink to guests, even unexpected ones. At a feast, this hospitality is amplified tenfold. You are welcomed, you are fed, you are celebrated. It's the opposite of your daily solitary herding work. It's about belonging. A mainstream historical fact is that feasting was a crucial social and political activity for the Mongol Empire, used by leaders like Genghis Khan to build loyalty among his followers, celebrate victories, and conduct diplomacy, with elaborate meals showcasing wealth and power. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that during traditional feasts involving hot stones like cork hog, the stones are often passed around and held after cooking, believed to absorb negative energy and promote well-being, making them part of the healing after the meal. Imagine passing around hot rocks for health benefits after eating half a goat. Sounds intense, but also kind of cool. Historians still argue whether the elaborate feast preparations, especially those involving whole animals and specialized cooking methods, were purely for taste and celebration or also served a practical purpose in utilizing all parts of the animal efficiently in one go. So while your daily bread, or rather your daily arul and milk tea, keeps you going, it's these moments of feasting centered around generously prepared meat and strong drinks that punctuate the year, providing not just physical nourishment, but also reinforcing the vital social fabric of the nomadic community. You sit around the steaming pot of korkog, the firelight dancing on the faces of friends and family, sharing stories and laughter, the rich aroma of cooked meat filling the air, and for a while the harshness of the steppe fades away, replaced by the warmth of belonging and the simple, profound joy of sharing a meal together. It's a moment of abundance in a life of careful resource management, a taste of something truly special. So you've navigated the chill of the steppe morning, the monotony of the daily trek, the surprising sustenance of dried milk curd, the milky tang of fermented mare's milk, and the rare, glorious indulgence of a feast cooked with hot stones. You've lived, albeit in your mind, the life of a Mongol herdsman relying on your animals for survival, every bite and sip a direct product of their health and your labour. But where does that ancient rhythm fit in today? Does anyone still live like that, churning butter in a saddlebag or carrying around rocks for dinner? Well, yes and no. Mongolia today is a country rapidly changing. Ulaanbaatar, the capital, is a sprawling, bustling city full of apartment buildings, traffic jams, oh yes, definitely traffic jams, and supermarkets stocked with goods from all over the world. You can buy bananas, instant noodles, and probably even those tiny little boxes of breakfast cereal with the cartoon characters. The global pantry has arrived. For many Mongols, especially those who have moved to urban centres, the traditional diet is no longer the sole source of nutrition. Bread, rice, vegetables, more variety than just potatoes now, and foods previously unavailable or rare are common. Meat consumption is still high. It's a cultural cornerstone after all, but the variety and preparation methods have diversified. You'll find everything from Korean BBQ joints to pizza places. However, the nomadic way of life, though its numbers are decreasing as people migrate to the cities, still persists. Out on the vast grasslands, many families continue to herd livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, horses, yaks and camels, and their lives are still deeply connected to the cycles of the animals and the seasons. And where there are herders, there are traditional foods. Walk into a gyr today, whether it's a family living full-time as herders, or perhaps a family spending the summer months in the countryside away from the city, and you'll likely still be offered sutate sai, that salty milk tea. You'll still find arul drying on the roof or stored inside, perhaps shaped differently now, maybe flavoured with sugar, a modern twist but still fundamentally the same dried curd. Airag is still made and consumed in season, especially during the summer when the mares are lactating abundantly. It's more than just a drink, it's a taste of identity, a connection to the ancestors who rode across continents powered by this very beverage. Even the more elaborate preparations haven't vanished. Korkog and budog are still made for special occasions, perhaps not using animal stomachs as much anymore, but definitely steady with metal containers and hot stones. These aren't just recipes, They're events, rituals that bring people together, reinforcing community bonds through shared labour, heating rocks is work, and shared bounty. It's a deliberate choice, a way to keep the culture alive in a tangible, delicious way. Imagine explaining to a modern teenager from London that their great-great-great-grandparents cooked dinner inside a goat with hot stones. They'd probably think you were making it up. But here it's living history. The resilience of these foodways is tied directly to the resilience of the nomadic culture itself. While technology has changed things, motorbikes replaced some horses for herding, solar panels, power lights, and even TVs and gears. Cell phones connect distant families. The fundamental relationship with the land and the livestock endures for many. The animals still provide the primary source of livelihood and food, and because of this, the knowledge of how to process milk into a dozen different forms, how to preserve meat without refrigeration, and how to make these traditional dishes is passed down, though perhaps not always as widely as before. This connection isn't just practical, it's deeply spiritual and cultural. The 5 types of livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, yaks, horses, and camels, aren't just sources of food. They are companions, wealth, and symbols. Their products are seen as pure and vital. This is why dairy features so prominently, even in places where other food is readily available. You still see vendors in Ulaanbaatar selling fresh erag or various types of arul. It's comfort food, identity food. Of course, modern challenges exist. Climate change is altering the steppe environment, leading to harsher winters, blizzards that kill livestock in huge numbers, making the nomadic life riskier and potentially less sustainable. Economic pressures drive people to seek work in cities, and globalization brings new tastes and habits, sometimes at the expense of traditional knowledge. It's a constant negotiation between the past and the present. A mainstream historical fact is that the collapse of the socialist system in the early 1990s led to a resurgence of private livestock ownership and a renewed emphasis on traditional nomadic culture, including its food practices after decades of collectivization efforts. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some traditional Mongol dishes are now being reinterpreted in modern Mongolian restaurants, appearing as gourmet items or fusion cuisine, showcasing the adaptability of these ancient ingredients and methods. You might find a fancy version of a Eru Earl cheesecake, which is a long way from a sun-dried lump on a gear roof. Historians still argue whether the shift towards a more settled urbanness and lifestyle and the adoption of global food products will inevitably lead to the decline and eventual loss of traditional Mongol food knowledge, or if core practices are resilient enough to adapt and survive in new forms. The legacy isn't just in the recipes, it's in the values associated with them: hospitality, resourcefulness, community, and a deep respect for the animals and the land. When you taste arul or sip erag, you're not just consuming calories. You're tasting centuries of adaptation and survival on the steppe. You're tasting the story of a people who built empires and navigated vast landscapes fueled by the simple, powerful products of their herds. And as you lie here now, perhaps drifting off, imagine the sun setting over that endless grassland one last time. The sound isn't traffic or distant city noise, it's the gentle lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the soft thud of horses grazing nearby. The smell isn't processed food, it's dry grass, wood smoke from the gur stove, and the faint, familiar tang of dried milk. You've journeyed through time and space, experienced a life utterly different from your own, a life defined by wind, animals, and a remarkable ability to turn milk and meat into sustenance, from dawn till dusk, year after year. It's a legacy of incredible resilience, adapting to the harshest environments and changing times, much like the herders themselves, who continue to find their way on the steppe, carrying their traditions forward, one salty cup of milk tea, one dried curd, one steaming pot of korkog at a time. The quiet strength of that life, the deep connection to the earth and its creatures, that's the enduring flavour. And perhaps, as you settle deeper into your own comfortable space, you can carry a little piece of that quiet strength with you into your dreams. The sounds of the steppe begin to fade now, the rustling of grass, the gentle snorting of horses, the distant bleating of the flock. The fire in the gur stove is embers now, casting a warm, sleepy glow. The smell of dried milk and wood smoke softens, becoming a comforting background hum. Your mind, full of images of endless skies and hardy people, grows heavy. The journey is ending, not with a jolt, but with a gentle release, like a sigh carried on the wind. You are safe, warm, and the echoes of history are fading, leaving only a sense of quiet peace. Let the images dissolve, the taste linger gently, and the sounds become the silence of the night. Drift now, relax, just let go, into the soft, welcoming dark.